I would like to start with a quote from John Ruskin that it is impossible to preserve anything that has been great or beautiful in architecture. This project is about a wall, expanding Norwegian type houses in the UNESCO Heritage Site area and back again, thereby creating a flexible space to accommodate economic in the domestic. I embarked on a journey along the North Sea, an area that was historically connected by trading routes, to find four buildings to survey, one in East England and three in the southern coast of Norway. From Oslo, I drove 8 hours to Losvan, the only place that is connected to the peninsula, and slowly going back to Murdo and Linger. Both islands are car-free islands and can only be accessed by 15 minutes of boat drive. These three areas in Norway are among another 20 constellation of islands that are currently serving as a local summer destination and applying to be UNESCO heritage site. For the demographic, in Lawson there are 30 people living all year round, but the population will go up to 1,000 in summer month, and there will be another increase of 10,000 people coming down from the cruise ship once the UNESCO heritage site is approved. This would make an unprecedented swelling, more than any of these islands could take. Just like modernization, of which it is part, preservation is a Western invention. These summer destinations are the supramolecular microsegment. They are being imposed by the macro UNESCO criteria, and the project lies in the problem of conservation and the potential for economic expansion from the exploding tourism. In a way that UNESCO is trying to capitalize the backwardness as a resource, it brings me to question the ethicality of it. Could one modernizing nation pay another nation not to change? From my journey, I gathered samples in the form of data as a series of survey drawings, as an attempt to study the existing old buildings in the affected area. I took a train to the town of Kojasol to see the oldest barn in England, which I read from Nicolaus Pevner book. This barn was an extension of the Kojasol Abbey from the 12th century. It was built on a slope. Thus, to save the overall building from rotting, the front wall has been pushed back to make a way for digging a gutter. In Norway, I found three Norwegian type houses from the 18th century in which the residents are living there all year round and try to understand what makes living suitable inside today. A house in Losven, attached to the peninsula, with the road connected directly to Oslo, facing the North Sea. It's an 1850s notch-lock timber construction type house in which over generations the owners keep adding rooms to support their domesticity. He added a laundry room in 19th century, a threshold in 20th century, and because it is located in the hilly area, he couldn't extend anymore horizontally, so he placed an annex on top of the rocky hill. Murdo has a population of 1, and I surveyed the house of the only person living in the island. It's strategically placed near the museum and the public pier, the only public pier which is used to access the island. The owner seized the opportunity to expand the house commercially, so he cut off part of his wall of his 18th century notch-lock type house and added a restaurant of a timber frame construction, a typological extension by subtraction, thereby connecting his domestic kitchen to serve the restaurant. He further added a timber decking in the 20th century to serve as a summer bar. Lastly, in Lingar, I found a house directly beside a water. This is a sailor house, and there are rows of sailor houses in the Lingar with their own pier, so these sailors can dock their own boat directly to their house. It is also an 1850s four-room type house with notched timber construction, and just like any other houses there, the owner flattened the ground to make garden and terrace. This is a house of Miss Ellingson, which I will get back to later. When I laid out the survey drawings of these four old buildings, I realized that the walls have been moved throughout the time. From shrinking, adding, cutting, and flattening, I concluded that the flexibility of building's outer perimeter is somehow proportional to the amount of a time a building could stand. Abstracted the idea of expanding and contracting of wall to make series of artifacts, to extend space and possibly lifespan. I started with a very mundane sliding wall panel with a latex membrane to create an immediate volume of space that is also retractable. Then I inserted the latex in the wood and started to cut the panels into smaller pieces. I proceeded to cast my own latex module but shifted my thinking into a more environmentally friendly and local material. But I still play with the concept of flexibility on cutting, this time with elastic rope, so you can add modules to extend the length. And I realized that the long notch timber structure can be cut into smaller modules. I also played with the secondary paneling, addressing the issue of different axial movement, an attempt to create enclosure from series of stacking. I added tracks and started to see the elongated notch lock as more of a modular construction material. Thereby, it is possible to add on or swap the different types of wall modules, varying the overall height, from solid wall to wall with opening and paneling and vertical stackings of wall modules. This latest artifact just before the school closed was an integration of sailcloth as part of the wall construction. After talking to the local sailmaker, I found out that Norwegians have a long historic hobby of sailing, but they can only use their sailcloth for 3 months before it deemed as unsuitable in the sea, while the metals were too imposing. There is lightness and transparency from the irregularity of the sailcloth, coming from the acknowledgement of paneling patterns of the timber wall construction next to it. From elasticity to flexibility to modularity and finally substituting with local materials. After a series of tests, I realized that the only way to extend type houses are by cutting them and only leaving the essential structural elements. In the case of log houses, it's the notch on the edges. To address the issue of conservation and the inevitable economic expansion, I propose a blunt move of cutting off the facade and dealing with the fact that it would actually collapse. Martha Clark had been cutting houses since 1970s, and it is possible to cut a straight line from the roof down to the foundation. I tried to challenge the attractiveness of the soon-to-be UNESCO heritage site with the already existing pulley and track system in the island that the locals used to pull their boats out from the water. Ideally, the locals would inherit a 250-year-old house from their Norwegian daddies. Then they would start to locate the main structures, which is half a meter radius of the notch lock on the corners. Then they start to make a surgical-like incisions to remove the wall panels and reinforce them. Lastly, they put tracks and timber decks on the ground to their desired extension direction before they can pull out their walls in that brief summer period, a brief summer madness. There are roughly 44 different permutations of the traditional Norwegian type houses, which follows the same logic of stacking logs around a fireplace in the center. I draw up grids, projecting from windows and doors as the pattern for expansion to prove that the same cutting patterns can be applied to all of them. Let's get back to Linger. There is currently one public pier to dock the tourist boat during the holiday season, but along the edge of the island, there are a series of sailor houses with their own pier. So when the 10,000 tourists docked from their cruise ship to the mainland and rented small ferries to Linger, these piers would potentially serve as a docking port. I checked the UNESCO application guideline and realized that the protected part are just the front facades, as they are trying to preserve the Nordic look in the elevation. With the increase in number in tourists, the house will able to expand by extending the front walls, and by moving walls horizontally, it creates a parallax blind spot as a room to extend vertically as well. Fire, all the way back to the primitive hut, was a central element in the living space, and in order to extend the house, I need to bring some fire along. I looked into Miss Ellingson's chimney, and I realized that, just like any of other Norwegian chimney, its section was crooked. I saw an opportunity of cutting the fireplace and move them together with the wall, and by moving the fireplace, I was able to change the whole ecology of the interior, much more than just in terms of how the house is heated. From the cold Norwegian winter in February, to sauna in May, to full expansion in July and August during the holiday season, and slowly pulling back in September ready for the incoming winter. Extending the wall while moving the centrality of the fireplace give the building a new life. This is a house of Miss Ellingson that I had surveyed. When summer comes, she would ask help from her neighbor to pull out the house, expanding second floor horizontally, moving the fireplace out for the summer nights, and lifting the panels to get the cross ventilation of that summer breeze. The transparency of sailcloth admit light during the day and lit up the Nordic village at night from the house interior. signaling that the neighbors that they are present. And most importantly, these alterations are reversible and be ready to be tucked back in during the Nordic winter, according to UNESCO Heritage Guide. This will be the only way for the local community to benefit from the exploding tourism in the summer, while still abide by the UNESCO guideline. Once the overall structure of the notch-lock wall is seen as a more of a timber frame structure, the owner can basically cut elements of their house, reinforce them, and making these elements to be movable and reversible. This way of cutting allows locals to escape the planning restriction that are going to be imposed. From the survey drawings and photograph that I got from Miss Ellingson's house, I tried to recreate her house interior and tried to imagine how it would look like when it's extended. During the winter, she would enjoy a warm tea in her living room by the fireplace. Then the summer begins. She would have the front walls pulled out with a careful slit-off opening from sailcloth, only unveiling the horizon where the water meets the neighboring island. Lifting the second floor, then she would recenter the fireplace and put on the additional floors. Now she can cook lobster for the incoming tourists and look straight into the bleeding jaw of capitalism and say, "Yes, Daddy, please." So when tourists dock at the port, her house would extend and accommodate as a restaurant with all the cooking served from her domestic kitchen. From surveying series of old buildings along the North Sea to start of cutting the very mundane elements that define enclosure, it brings me to the final part, which is the injection of this micro-physical idea into the molar and micro-political fabric of the UNESCO Heritage Protected Area. Houses near water would capitalize to the opportunity to be a sauna in the winter, while houses more inland would probably just expand to cater more accommodations or possibly restaurants. While Norwegians traditionally mark their house boundary with stones and fences, there's a possibility of compromise between two or three neighbors to create a more collective surface, thereby changing the overall social landscape and attitude of the village. Just imagine the screeching metallic sound of the whole village in that brief summer when people pull out their front walls. Tension from sailcloth which clashes with the bold wood and stones, age, made soft by the sea salt, chopping off the whole wall and bring violence to these poor houses. It's like what Winston said. It's like breaking someone's leg and finding a beauty in it. Thank you.